Welcome to Beyond the Code, the podcast where industry experts and brilliant legal minds discuss the impact of new emerging technologies. I'm your host, Yitzi Hammer, a lawyer and tech enthusiast. Join us as we explore the legal, regulatory, and ethical issues surrounding AI, blockchain, and more. Get ready to go beyond the code and stay ahead of the game. John Keh, welcome to Beyond the Code. So excited to have you here. It's been a long time coming. We met about a year ago in Paris, and a friendship has developed ever since. And really excited to have you here on the pod. And I think we should probably just start with you giving us a little bit of an introduction to who you are, where you came from, where you're going, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, I'm John. I'm half American and half Hong Konger. Grew up in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and went to university in the United States. So that's kind of a little bit of a background of who I am. And my start professionally actually began in the apparel retail industry, working on a kind of pretty sizable retailers supply chain, also doing some design work, and then stumbled into marketing 2015 when I worked on a startup that was based out of Boston and Hong Kong. And then in 2017 kind of got my first exposure outside of kind of like an academic esoteric perspective on Bitcoin. In 2017, trying to do an ICO. This was kind of like a supply chain ICO. I was like, blockchain, supply chain. They sound so similar, right? Obviously, that didn't really work out. And then 2019 entered the space at an OTC desk here in Hong Kong. And from there, we spun up a VC about 8 months after I'd been working there. During that time as well, there was an acquisition, which at the time was, pretty incredible deal for all the stakeholders of the company, where Alameda had come in and acquired us. Everyone was very felt fortunate to be there at the time. And then obviously we branched off into the family office / VC world, where we did about like 250 plus investments in the span of 18 months. It was a lot of work. It was very exhausting, but timing wise, it was right at the end of DeFi summer. Also having worked on some projects and incubated some projects, like one of the most notable was like linear finance. That was a great project to work on. And kind of from there, really identified the opportunity with NFTs before all these, anti-mochas and stuff like that. So it was a very smart team who really was on the pulse with, what's happening with the Bitcoin cycles, what happened 6 months after, and then how to really identify these verticals with, massive opportunities like NFTs. In 2021, a lot of the departments were kind of being consolidated or kind of full on pushed over to the Alameda FTX side. And for me, I really, no one knew about all this shady stuff that was happening, right? I got a lot of respect for the guys that were at the company when it went down. A lot of the companies that were acquired by them, a lot of people who do have integrity are men of honor. So I want to kind of say that, and also make a point that by no means am I defending or justifying what happened. I mean, I got burned there too, personally, having an account on FTX and losing a substantial amount of, whatever was left of the acquisition that was made, and how that translated over to their, shares, stock, what have you. But had they been a bank in the United States, they only need 10% of the assets that they're basically investing, right? So hypothetically, had they had a banking license, this would have been completely fine, right? And I'm not trying to justify what they're saying. I'm just trying to point out the fact that the traditional financial system is so broken that, everyone's like, oh, these crypto guys, it's so bad. But like, well, what's going on in traditional finance, right? This is like a systemic issue that's happening in traditional finance. This was just something that was adopted by crypto bros, and they didn't have the institutional support and bureaucratic support that banks do to kind of prop them up in these kind of situations. But yeah, I'd left in 2021 before any of this the stuff had happened, And I started RuntheChain, which is a digital marketing agency. And now it's we do a lot more on the consulting side and the incubation side. We help projects kind of do tokenomics workshops. We do a little bit more of like again, more on the consulting side than marketing these days, although marketing is really at our core what we do. But I think it's a lot more in demand, shall we say, when the prices are going up, kind of stuff like that. Whereas in climates like this, people focus more on building, they focus more on ecosystems and stuff like that. And I think that's really where we as a company shift to match the climate. And then we also have RuntheTech, which is a white label technology solutions company. A lot of this is really out of the box stuff where it's like 80% done. What we saw last cycle was that a lot of clients were wasting time trying to build stuff that really is widely available, pretty bulletproof as far as like going to GitHub and finding something that's open source. You change a couple of the variables and it's pretty much suits your purposes without having to spend 6, 8, 12 months developing this exact same thing that is completely free, and that it works because a lot of different smart contracts already have implemented the code, right? So I'm not trying to say that we're hardcore developers or anything like that. I think everyone at RTC knows a little bit of code, but it's more about having the ability to kind of shine a flashlight to the right corner and then kind of piece together the right elements to help your existing development team kind of get that to the next level. And then we also have a family office, which is kind of been pretty dull the last year. I'm not going to lie, with obviously the kind of turmoil that's happened, the turbulence, but at the same time, albeit a lot of projects that didn't survive, the ones that have are never cease to impress me as far as delivering products that are very user friendly, doing stuff that I might personally not appreciate as much, but then again, I'm in my mid-30s now. It's the kind of stuff that really hits on demographics that even I'm not on the pulse with anymore, as far as these products that are really cell phone centric. For me, if I'm going to do anything in the Web3 space, I'm only comfortable doing them on a computer. But I understand that the next generation of traders, the next generation of NFT holders, the next generation of GameFi is going to be very mobile device oriented, and seeing these projects really identify how they can fit in with this next cycle's users has been very impressive. But again, there's been a lot of losses, and I think that part of these 4-year Bitcoin cycles is really teaching you about how to be humble and have better kind of mechanisms in place each time you go through a cycle to really kind of capture, maximize your gains, minimize your losses, right? That's all of our responsibilities each cycle, is to protect our funds, but also grow our funds, right? So that's kind of in a nutshell my story, how I got here. Is there anything else you want me to kind of cover as far as my backstory goes?
No, that was great. I wanted to like zero in on a few things that came to mind when you were kind of shining some light on your backstory. The first, which you kind of just glazed over a little bit, was your interaction with Alameda. I know that like in this industry, we're all very much emotionally tied to our losses. There's like so many shit coins that I could have bought when they were, worthless, and then could have made a ton of money on when they were slightly less worthless. And, these things, sometimes I feel like they plague me, right? Like I look at colleagues of mine who, made a killing on some of these deals, and I just think to myself like, oh, if I only just, click that button or whatever. So, and then very often if I like hold on long enough, I'll watch them crash and burn afterwards, and I'll be like, oh, thank God, thank God I didn't get on that wild ride, because it wouldn't have been worth it to end up where they ended up. And I imagine you probably have like a similar feeling towards Alameda. Like you were there at the beginning, probably saw some of your friends who you said are like stand-up guys, and you didn't know about any of the things that were going on behind the scenes. You probably saw them go to their parties in the Bahamas and whatever, and thought to yourself like, should I have jumped on that boat, and then you probably had a sigh of relief when you saw it crash and burn afterwards. You say, "Thank God I wasn't there to see the ship sink." So I'm just kind of curious into like your mindset, both along that journey and also now, like in hindsight. Like I wonder what your takeaways are.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, the important thing is you can't, and it's difficult, but you can't really think like that as far as like, this kind of perpetual circle of FOMO and kind of also comparing yourself with others, right? The worst thing is if you tell someone about a token you just made a killing on, you're just kind of trying to brag, not trying to solicit financial advice, and that person goes in and buys that token, and then it dumps, and they're like, yo, you gave me the worst
You told
advice and
me.
you're sitting on one end. Yeah, right. But I think that so that's a perfect example of like, just my trade isn't your trade, right? Even if we're trading the same token, it's not the same trade, right? It's never going to be the exact same moment, exact same time. And I think that's like one of the things that's kind of like liberating with Web3. I mean, obviously at the time, when I left, this is long before, there was any sort of concern at the time. They were a very successful company, $34 billion, like all of that kind of stuff. And, there was like a massive kind of integration consolidation between all of these companies and moving them to the Bahamas. And for me, obviously, it was a situation where everyone's like, oh man, like, look where you could have been. Everyone's sending like videos of like these dope apartments, these beach parties, what have you. But for me, I had like my freedom. I had the ability to kind of start navigating my own ship, albeit a tiny little boat compared to the ship that I was on before. But
But it was yours.
yeah, it was mine, right? And I think end of the day, it's not like when I saw all these, horrible things happening, all these, the crash and all that I felt good. I think that's one of those things in crypto. There's like a culture where a lot of people have this mentality of, I would rather see you lose than win myself, or it's not enough for me to win. Someone has to lose. And I think these are horrible tribalistic mentalities that don't do our industry a service because we're still so small. So I mean, for me, it's kind of self-taught mentality of trying not to think that way. It was really felt bad for the people that were affected by this. I mean, including myself. I was quite angry when this all initially happened. I think, I mean, more than anything, I was in denial when this was going down. I mean, days before this happened, everyone was like, "You got to get your money off FTX. It's going to go down." I was like, "No, no way are these guys gonna, be that irresponsible? No way are they
Too big to
insolvent."
fail.
Turns out, exactly. But I think end of the day, it's one of those things where initially, yes, I did get that feeling a lot, especially when you're trading, and you beat yourself up about not getting out of a position that ultimately you end up losing money on, where you could have made a 2x, you could have made a 3x, but you held on for so long and you got greedy. But I think it's a point of crypto's Web3 will teach you discipline. It'll teach you modesty, and it'll teach you kind of how to deal with or not. A lot of people left, but it'll teach you how to deal with, high intensity situations where you're looking at very dire consequences, either financially or, for your company or with regulations, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I think another thing that you mentioned before was that if you kind of survive these bear markets, then some of the valuable lessons that you take away are humility, which is something that this industry badly needs because everybody's so cocky in a bull run. And also preparation. There's that saying like building in a bear market. Everybody talks about how they're building in a bear, but I think you could only continue on that upwards trajectory with the perspective of getting out of these bear markets if you have that humility that's so necessary in this industry. So it seems that you have the absolute right mindset to sustain this cycle, and I'm excited to see what Run the Tech and Run the Chain have in store for us. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on NFTs. Like, will they still be here in the next cycle? I know that you're a big supporter of digital art. You have some beautiful digital art pieces, albeit not digital, on the wall behind you. And we met at a live NFT auction, like outside of NFT technology, which I definitely identify there being potential, in the ticketing industry and otherwise. How do you think digital art will look going forward?
I think there still will be a place for it, but the price points are going to be a lot lower. If you look at it from a perspective of you had an asset class where there were just a couple hundred creators at the beginning of last cycle that really got in early and figured out how to climb this, highbrow art ladder, right? Get involved with Christie's, Sotheby's, all that kind of stuff. But now you've got millions of creators in this asset class, so it's way oversaturated. Let alone the kind of content being created by AI, which is also going to, it's starting to feed into NFTs and stuff like that. So I think that they still will have a place for sure, especially the tech side. But I think the creator economy and NFTs is going to look a lot different next cycle. But I think it will still have a place, but it's more about utility value and like the community element behind it, right? I think that if there's real value from having the NFT and the user likes it, right? So it's like kind of having your watch profile is your NFT, but that's also access to, XYZ benefits, right? Perfect examples are these K-pop groups, or in Hong Kong, there's a group called Mirror, and these like 13, 14, teenagers pay, I think, around 100 USD to get access to this app. And you're not even accessing the real like boy band members, you're accessing the other people that are part of that community, right? So I think these kind of business models in the context of NFTs, right? That's where we're going to see really the survival and flourishing of
Like community
the space.
building and engagement, you mean?
Yeah, but it's also there has to be, an element of like, yes, they collaborated with a legitimate artist. It looks cool. People want to put it on their watch, or there's some sort of flex. But at the same time, it gives you access. It gives you, benefits. It gives you, a sense of community, right? I think the intangibles are really what creates long-term value, right?
You touched on like AI. You just mentioned it in passing. It's kind of almost impossible to glance over AI today. It's such a big part of the conversation, and I think like in a lot of crypto blockchain circles, you see the conversation evolving towards AI. And I wonder if that's just people kind of abandoning the sinking crypto ship and looking for the next thing to cling on to, or if they're both really like closely integrated. Like somebody posted on LinkedIn a couple of days ago, AI has no future without blockchain. In other words, that the two are somehow going to be entangled in terms of how they're distributed and how they're stored and how they're processed. What are your thoughts on that?
I think yes, we did see, especially like towards the end of last year, beginning of this year, a huge exodus of Web3 into AI.
Mm-hmm.
Funny thing is, a lot of those guys are now coming back to Web3 with like AI branding, right? But I think initially it was very much like people kind of grasping at straws, trying to find something that they can kind of coattail into the next kind of wave. But I think that absolutely AI and Web3 are going to be, synonymous with one another. I think that if you look at from just fundamentals of AI and Web3, right? If you have a single kind of point of failure, like centralization is a single point of failure, right? And I think if you distribute AI in a safe way, right? Obviously, you have to have the development of the AI centralized. Otherwise, you don't really know. It's a black box, right? You don't know what you're going to get. But once you kind of get beyond that point, decentralization of the AI itself just kind of makes sense from even a technical perspective of like access points, right? If everything's there's a single access point and that single access point gets pinged, at some point it's going to get DDoS with enough queries, right? But if you decentralize the access point, if you decentralize, so I think that there's, and obviously I'm not an expert in AI. It's something that I, like everyone else, has been kind of digging into as more of a retail user with like, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, ChatGPT, of course. But I think that what we're going to see as far as the pairing of these APIs that are already readily available from these AI protocols and the Web3 side, which is already happening, right? We're seeing socialify platforms integrating ChatGPT, a lot of decentralized storage platforms using ChatGPT for searching, querying, and like kind of creating content around their decentralized storage platform. So it's already happening, right? And I think that end of the day, it's really how the core infrastructure of the AI is developed, and what becomes the gold standard for. I mean, right now it's ChatGPT 4, but it could be Google Bard in a couple of years with whatever they're building. But I think that for sure they will definitely see a lot of products that come out that use both AI and Web3. Um, although I think they can both exist independently as far as like companies that are doing things completely outside of one another. But I think that we're going to see stuff that really has a positive impact on people's lives coming from companies that put out something that really meaningfully uses both Web3 and AI.
I would have thought that as soon as the Copyright Office came out with the statement saying basically any output that comes from a generative AI is not copyrightable, people would shy away from using it, right? Like if I can't say it's mine afterwards, what good is it? But we haven't seen that. On the contrary, people are kind of just reimagining what ownership of content means, what its significance even is. I don't know if it's a good thing. In a sense, to me, it's kind of put on these new glasses as to like almost all social media content. I mean, you're a marketing guy, so I'm sure you've seen it as well. But just now that like I've toyed with like ChatGPT and Midjourney, and I see the generic content that's coming out, a lot of times I'm appalled by what the output is, and so I don't use it. But then I start to see in these like new vision glasses everybody else's content online on social media, and I'm like this is like everything just looks like it's generated from an AI, and so it's really hard to kind of cut through the noise and find content that is like really original and unique, which is like frustrating but also eye-opening. If you're using an AI, which is, training off of existing data models to come up with something that you view as unique, then whatever content you're producing isn't that interesting to begin with. But anybody who's relying solely on these tools to come up with their contribution to the world, I think that they should think twice before contributing. That might have been a little bit harsh.
I think you're right. It's you have to feed it alpha, right? If you just are drawing from ChatGPT in and of itself, it doesn't have any alpha, right? But if you one of my favorite plugins is like a PDF reader where you can kind of feed ChatGPT and say, hey, this is the only source material you're going to use to tell me anything. Then it's using that document, and perhaps I wrote that document, so there's already alpha in that document, but I just need it reformatted. That's when I think the best kind of use case for in whatever you're actually doing, right? There's a number of different ways you can apply this, both as an artist, content creator. But I think if you provide it with good source material, then you can create something that's truly unique, truly useful. But as far as the context you mentioned, where you're like, hey, ChatGPT, do my homework, it's not going to give you anything unique, right? You'll get through school, you'll probably get like a B plus or whatever, but I think you're right. But and going back to your point on copyright, my perspective right now is that AI isn't sentient yet. Once AI is sentient, once there's things that it's doing that we completely do not understand, because right now, ChatGPT 4, I think the IQ is like 150 or 170, right? So it's a very, very smart person, if not a genius. But the next level up, ChatGPT 5, is like something north of 1,000 IQ points, right? At that point, it's smarter than any human being alive or ever could be, right? And that's when it gets scary, because that's when it's maybe sentient, and that's when you really got to think about, well, if this thing has a self-identity, then the IP belongs to that individual, right? But I think right now, because it's just not really, it's like a clever magician, right? It sounds kind of human, but it's not really to a point where it's true AI. So I think at this point, it's like a very high scale version of like let's say Paint, right? And does the Paint, the software provider, did they get the IP from users that generate art using their platform? No, right? Because the user went through the time to use this tool to generate that piece of art, whatever it might be, right? So I think Midjourney, stuff like this, it's really on a par with using a very sophisticated form of Paint, to where the user is the one that's prompting it, right? The prompt engineer is still the one feeding it source material to come out with an outcome, or asking it to use the source material it already has to generate something new, right? Or something perceivably new. So I think that, that's kind of where I'm at right now, because I've definitely had this conversation a couple of times. And I think that the real question isn't real about, because I think right now it's like, it's a tool, right? But the further down the line, we're going to have to ask ourselves, is it now no longer a tool? Now, is it sentient? If it is sentient, we need to come up with a whole new system of laws with how you govern these new kind of beings that we've created that now have their own, personalities potentially, and stuff like that. Because if we don't, then we're looking at like a Skynet scenario, right? And I know that's kind of outlandish, but I think that it's never too soon to think about what are the kind of moral consequences of I mean, it starts with stuff as simple as copyright, but then it ends with, well, if this thing is sentient, what kind of rights as an individual does it end up having, right?
There's definitely a lot of very interesting moral questions that come up. But just going back for a second to the copyright perspective, I know that you're not a lawyer, but I am curious as to, I don't know, perhaps in Asia what the current practices are vis-a-vis intellectual property. Because I know in the U.S. Copyright Office has kind of ruled that because, I mean, and we've said that the output is only as smart as the input, but the U.S. Copyright Office has ruled that since when you do feed in an input or a prompt, you don't really know what to expect as a result, and you may have to feed in 150 or 1500 prompts just to get the desired result. So then you don't have sufficient authorship over the end result. And that's not the same thing with MS Paint, for example, where you're holding the brush and you know exactly what's coming out. It's true you're using tools that are being provided by a machine, but you are fully orchestrating the works there. With an AI, it's different. For example, if MS Paint worked that I fed in a prompt and said, draw me blah, blah, and then the paint started moving on the screen, you would agree that it's not the same functionality. So currently, anything that you feed in a prompt and get an output, you don't own it per se. It may not be infringing on anybody else's rights in the sense that you can, use it without being worried that you're going to get sued by somebody, but you won't be able to protect your ownership over that in the sense that somebody else can come and take your works and use it freely without you being able to make a claim to them. So, I mean, that's as far as the U.S. Copyright Office is concerned, and they're generally the ones who kind of like set the tone from an intellectual property perspective vis-a-vis registration. Do you know if there are any different practices in Asia?
So I would imagine that we're going to do exactly what the U.S. does, right? That Hong Kong typically does. I mean, China as well. So yeah, I mean it's an interesting point. I would imagine that if I made all the source material pieces, I own the copyright to all the source material I'm feeding the AI, then I would have the rights to it. But I think that's an interesting point as far as, well, you don't know how the brush was, how it's painting on the canvas, right? And until you do, then
from a registration perspective, even if you owned all the rights that were fed in, you would not be able to copyright the output. An interesting question that comes up, which they haven't ruled on yet, but I think that probably the answer will be in the affirmative, is whether or not you could copyright prompts, right? Because like we said, it's the output is only as smart as the input. And we have all these like prompt whisperers, prompt engineers that are propping up, that are people who really know how to speak to the AI. I would imagine that we will be able to copyright certain prompts. But I don't know how helpful that is, because even if you can copyright the prompt and nobody else can feed the prompt in, whatever output comes out is in the public domain and anybody could use it. So I don't need your prompt. I'll just take your end result and do whatever I want with it. So there's really a lot of fascinating questions that come up. Like I thoroughly enjoy being involved in this industry, at least on the legal end of things, and watching kind of how it evolves on a daily and hourly basis. Much more fun than crypto.
I think it's interesting that the businesses that are going to pop up around this, because once people figure out, hey, this stuff you can never actually copyright it. So I've got a t-shirt company now. I've got all these great images I can start throwing on t-shirts. You know what I mean? Whatever it might end up being. But I think that in some regards, it's frustrating for the prompt engineers and the content creators that are punching in stuff into this. But at the same time, I think a big issue for a lot of companies is always kind of going through the process of like, well, what can I use? What's legal? What are the terms of the use for the IP? But if all this IP basically falls in a bucket of free to use, it'll be interesting to see what kind of businesses come out of this. For sure, because I think that like it's always a double-edged sword where one end of the spectrum is cut off, but this opens up a whole new end of the spectrum where this content can be used in I mean, well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure you could use it in any form factor, and you would always be able to kind of keep full profits that you make from whatever product or content that you put out there.
It depends on the platform, like whether or not they license you commercial usage rights, and if there's a
Gotcha,
limit to those
gotcha.
commercial usage rights. Like, for example, Midjourney, you only have commercial use rights if you're a paying member. So like, and these things are changing rapidly. And here I think like it's similar. We've seen something similar in like the NFT realm before coming here. There's this visual artist creator. I'm not really sure what he calls himself, by the name of Ryder Rips, who kind of like really tried hard to poke the bear with Yuga Labs by taking each ape and reminting it in its exact form. I think maybe slightly higher definition, and claim that that they didn't have the rights. That he could basically that he could do this without infringing anybody's rights. And there's a lawsuit ensuing right now that's like very interesting to follow. But he kind of said like there's an interesting conversation here. I want to bring it to the forefront, and so I'm going to poke the bear as hard as I can, just to kind of like spark the conversation. And we're seeing conversations like this evolving in AI as well, with a comic book called Zarya the Dawn by a New York-based artist, Chris Castanova, who tried to copyright a comic book that was made solely from Midjourney prompts. And really interesting conversations that are emerging with the Copyright Office, and these are kind of like shaping copyright policy going forward. And I think there's going to be a lot more things like this that kind of force us to raise these difficult questions, and it's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, definitely very, very early days for all of this, right? And especially in the context of how all of this is going to mesh together, right? I think what was generative art last cycle will be AI art this cycle, right? I mean, it's always the same thing but slightly different, right? I think that the first ICOs evolved into decentralized finance, like the Uniswaps and all that good stuff. Then we had NFTs, which kind of leaned into the metaverse, and next it'll be who knows, right? I think it's definitely interesting times to be alive. And I mean, going back to kind of the more Web3 side of things, I think right now is the time to really be engaged. I mean, at the last like year or two was the time to kind of switch off and unplug from the market, just because it's dire. People are kind of drowning, and it was tough times. But I think that the next 6 to 8 months, right, but between now and April of next year, really are going to determine the people that really do well next cycle, and those that do not, right? I think, and this kind of applies, more than anything to the Web3 side, but I think it also kind of carries over to AI as well. Just seeing how many different projects are involved with it. I mean, for me, I kind of got sick initially of hearing about every single project that we'd invested in. Oh, we're doing AI now. Oh, like AI this, or like projects that had pitched to us before they come out. Oh, but wait, we're like ChatGPT for Web3 now, or what have you. But I've seen a couple of projects that really did it right. There's a decentralized storage platform. Absolutely love these guys. They're a hardware company. They're a Web3 company. A very, very smart team. The edge here is that they're 80% cheaper than AWS, right? Which is a no-brainer as far as like the value proposition. But they took basically a form of ChatGPT. They kind of adjusted it for their purposes, and for decentralized storage, right? They gave a demo when they did a talk in Hong Kong where they prompted it. They're like, hey, find me all the images of me holding a yellow cup, right? So the Dr. Lee, the head of the project, had been holding a yellow cup in like Dubai and like Europe, like different places, just to make a point later down the road when he gave this talk. And he's like, okay, now write me social media posts for Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, right? And then so it went through all that. So it sorted the images, it wrote all these texts for them, and it started to be something where I was like, this isn't just kind of like a trend grabbing product, right? This actually does add value to the user, right? Because it's the same as going through your Google Drive, but now instead of having like that kind of fill in that you get when you're in Google search where it gives you recommendations, it's kind of filling in, you're interacting with it more interpersonally with your data, right? You have this ability to really engage with your data through this kind of like contact solution, which is the AI, right? So I thought that was like something that's really cool, seeing that it's not just kind of a cash grabby integration. It actually made sense. I know I kind of veered off from copyright.
Did you guys invest in them?
Yeah, that's actually what my personal
subtle shill.
yeah, gotta give it a shill. But it's to be honest, I really like the team. One of their project leads, love his story. Mike Robinson, really great guy, great project lead. Dr. Lee as well. He worked on 5G tech back in 2013. Columbia University professor. At the time when we started first working with him, he taught the only Ivy League blockchain course in the United States. So I really, he's Shanghainese as well. And for me, my background is my family's from Shanghai, 3 generations ago. So there's obviously that Chinese background kind of thing. But yeah,
your family's from the Chinese dynasty, right? I remember you telling me that.
No. So my grandfather was like bougie, living in the Bund, all this kind of stuff, a playboy in Shanghai. But during World War II, he was a spy for the Chinese nationals against the Japanese in Nanjing, right? So he told horrible stories about seeing babies getting speared by the Japanese and things like that. And then after the war had ended, his younger brother was one of the leading generals for Mao Zedong. And so he called his brother, my grandfather, he's like, you got to get out of Shanghai. He's like, why? He's like, well, I'm the general that's going to invade Shanghai, right? So grandfather ended up, basically starting from zero, taking a train down to Hong Kong. While his brother ended up being number 3 in the Communist Party, and ultimately had to start from zero here in Hong Kong.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
family
great.
dinners were awkward for a while because one half the family is like high, Communist Party people. The other half of the family is like CITIC. They own CITIC and they BA Bank and stuff like that. So like, communists and finance people for like 20, 30 years did not get along until like the 80s when China's like, okay, we're opening up. We're going to like reinvent ourselves. So yeah. Very eclectic background on the Chinese family side.
Okay, I'm sure those are loaded family dinners. Would love to be a fly on the wall.
No, actually, you would never tell these days. I think we did one big family dinner in like the 2010s or something like that, and it was like 3 or 4 banquet halls with like 500-600 relatives.
Wow,
it seemed pretty friendly.
Wow,
but
okay.
My Shanghainese
insane family. So. Okay,
yeah.
John, this is fantastic. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation, and hopefully we get a chance to see each other again at some point.
Hopefully, we can do another one of these in the next couple of months where the vibe is more positive on the crypto side, where it's like, oh, Bitcoin's bumping, all these DeFi projects, what have you. Right now everyone's kind of like, there's this like cliff like that happens where if we're over 30K Bitcoin, everyone's gearing up to do like token launches. Everyone's shilling their products. I mean, I've got like 5 different apps on my phone now that I spend most of my time just playing around with for different projects, to where I'm like, this is legit, it's going to work. But it really, like, I don't pressure them at all on when to list and what, like, it could go either way. If we're below 29K or 30K, then it's, probably going to be a horrible listing. But if we're above, it might go all right. Yeah.
I share your sentiments. It's the same with almost all my clients. Like when Bitcoin's high, everybody's high. It's quite amazing. Like if you want to just check what people's mood is today, you just go into CoinMarketCap and check what Bitcoin's trading at. Anyways, John, thank you so much. If my listeners want to follow you on social media and get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, probably my Twitter. I think that's where I'm most active these days. RuntheChain 9000. Yeah.
All right. RuntheChain 9000. Awesome. John, be well, and we'll be in touch.
Likewise. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Code. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, share with your friends, and to tune in again next week for more fun and insightful conversation.